A millionaire returns home unexpectedly and is shocked by what the nanny was doing with his twins. Daniel Whitmore returned to his suburban mansion earlier than expected after a multi-million-dollar deal was canceled at the last minute. And the very moment he stepped into the back garden, he was left completely frozen, because before his eyes was a sight that should not have existed in the dark memory of the past many months. Ethan and Lucas, his 4-year-old twin sons, were laughing out loud on an old wooden seesaw. Daniel felt as if the air around him had suddenly thickened. 6 months. For 6 long months, he had not seen a single genuine smile on the faces of those 2 children. They had not laughed since the day their mother vanished from their lives. But now Ethan and Lucas were laughing so hard that their eyes curved into crescents, their cheeks flushed pink, their small feet kicking the air in undisguised excitement. Standing at the center of the seesaw was a woman. She gripped the middle of the wooden plank firmly with both hands, keeping the motion steady and safe. She wore a simple light blue uniform with a neat white collar, a carefully pressed apron tied around her waist. Her dark brown hair was pinned into a tidy bun at the nape of her neck, a few loose strands escaping with each gentle movement. Her face was filled with a soft, unforced smile, neither exaggerated nor strained. It was the smile of someone fully present in that moment. Daniel did not realize when his hand had loosened. His leather briefcase slipped from his grasp and fell onto the green lawn with a dull thud. But he did not hear it. Every one of his senses seemed to be fixed entirely on the scene before him. That woman was Clara Hayes, the housekeeper he had hired less than 3 weeks ago, the woman from whom he had never expected very much. Daniel stood motionless, as if any movement might cause the scene to dissolve like an illusion. In that instant, the image from 6 months earlier rose in his mind. 6 months earlier, Daniel Whitmore had never imagined that his life could collapse in silence. It had been just an ordinary morning. Daniel woke up early as usual, changed in his spacious bedroom, then went downstairs to the kitchen. On the cold marble counter, beside the coffee machine, lay a neatly placed white envelope. His name was written on it in a familiar hand. Inside was a short letter. There was no long explanation. No tears stained the paper. Just a few dry, detached lines saying that she needed to leave, that she could no longer continue this life, and that he should take good care of the children. And that was it. Daniel stood frozen for a long time in the wide kitchen, the thin sheet trembling slightly in his hand. He reread the letter countless times, as if by reading it long enough, its meaning might change. But it did not. She was truly gone. Not a single goodbye to Ethan and Lucas. The children woke up that morning and found their mother gone. At first, they thought she had just stepped out for a while. They sat on the living room floor and waited. Then an hour passed. 2. The entire morning. By noon, Ethan began to ask questions. Lucas began to cry. Daniel did not know how to answer. He had handled multi-million-dollar deals, had made decisions that affected thousands of people, but in front of the confused eyes of his 4-year-old sons, he was completely helpless. He only said that their mother had to go away for a while. But that while stretched endlessly. In the days that followed, the mansion became a completely different place. No more light footsteps in the morning. No more familiar perfume lingering in the hallways. No more dinners waiting on the table. Nights were the worst. Ethan and Lucas woke repeatedly, sobbing in the darkness. They called for their mother in their sleep, their voices breaking with fear. They clung tightly to each other on the bed, trembling as if the world would collapse the moment they let go. Daniel stood outside their bedroom door many nights, unable to step inside. He was afraid of his son's eyes, afraid of the questions he had no answers to, afraid to face the truth that even he himself did not understand how everything had come to this. The house that had once felt spacious now felt suffocatingly heavy. During the day, the boys hardly spoke. They did not ask to play. They did not laugh. They did not cry loudly. They only sat close together, their backs against the wall, their eyes fixed on the doorway, as if waiting for someone who would never return. They began to eat less, then almost not at all. Even the foods they once loved most were pushed aside. Their weight dropped noticeably within just a few weeks. The doctor warned him, but Daniel could only nod absent-mindedly. He threw himself into work more than ever. Meetings followed meetings, business trips piled up. Daniel told himself that he needed to keep everything running smoothly, that the children needed financial stability, that he was doing the right thing. But deep down, he knew he was running away. Every time he came home and saw the two children curled up in a room far too large for their small bodies, Daniel felt a dull ache spreading across his chest, a guilt no contract could ever soothe. One night, as Daniel passed through the dark hallway, he heard a trembling whisper from the boy's room. "Mommy won't come back." Those words pierced his heart like a knife. After hearing his son's trembling whispers in the darkness that night, Daniel Whitmore realized he could no longer delay. The boys needed more than hurriedly canceled business trips or the rare evenings when he was home, but his mind was still trapped in numbers and contracts. They needed someone to be there. So Daniel began doing what he did best, finding solutions. He hired help. The first nanny arrived just a week later. She had a perfect resume, degrees in early childhood education, experience working for multiple wealthy families. On her first day, she entered the house with a confident smile and a firm, professional voice. But only 3 days later, she stood in Daniel's office with a hollow face and an exhausted voice. "Mr. Whitmore, I've tried my best, but these children won't cooperate. They cry all night, refuse to sleep, and won't let me touch them. I can't continue." Daniel offered to raise her salary. He offered more days off. He offered everything money could buy. She shook her head. That afternoon, she left. The second nanny lasted exactly 1 week. She did not say much. She called near dawn, her voice trembling, saying she would not be coming back, then hung up before Daniel could ask for a reason. She did not even return to collect the rest of her pay. The third was the one who haunted Daniel the most. She believed in discipline. She believed children needed strict rules to stabilize again. She raised her voice in the hallway, folded her arms, and demanded that Ethan and Lucas behave properly. That day, Daniel stood at the far end of the corridor and saw his sons pressed into the corner, trembling like fledgling birds driven into a trap. Their eyes held not defiance, but a raw, primal fear. He dismissed her that very day, and still paid her the full month's salary. He did not want his children growing up afraid of adult voices. The fourth nanny disappeared in the night. The next morning, Daniel realized she was gone, taking with her several expensive towels and 2 silver candlesticks from the dining room. He did not call the police, not because he did not care, but because he was too exhausted to face another complication. The fifth was an older woman, nearly 60, with over 40 years of experience caring for children. At the interview, she said with certainty that she had raised an entire generation. But 3 days later, she stood in the kitchen, eyes red, hands trembling as she held her bag. "I have never seen children this deeply wounded," she said, her voice breaking. "They need something that I cannot give." She left in tears. After that, Daniel stopped. For 2 whole weeks, he hired no one else. The vast mansion was left with only an exhausted man and 2 broken children. Daniel tried to do everything himself. He came home earlier, canceled meetings, declined several business trips. But he did not know how. He cooked dinner and burned everything. He bathed the boys, and they cried and struggled as if under attack. He tried to put them to bed, but Ethan and Lucas stayed awake all night, crying softly, clinging tightly to each other in bed. With every failure, Daniel felt he was doing something wrong all over again. In the end, Daniel Whitmore was forced to admit that he could not keep stumbling in the dark any longer. What was happening to Ethan and Lucas was beyond the ability of a single father to handle, no matter how powerful or resourceful that father might be. He took his sons to see a child psychologist. The clinic was in a quiet building, softly lit, its walls covered in diplomas and certificates. Everything there radiated professionalism, designed to inspire trust. Daniel was used to places like that. They usually made him feel secure. But not this time. Ethan and Lucas sat pressed together on a small sofa, never separating for even a moment. Their tiny hands were tightly interlaced, their eyes never lifting even once. Any sound made their bodies tense. The doctor observed them for a long time before speaking. "They are experiencing severe abandonment trauma," he said slowly. Their mother's sudden departure completely shattered their basic sense of safety. Daniel clenched his fists. The doctor explained that for young children, an unexplained absence means the world becomes untrustworthy. The people they love can disappear at any moment, and so their natural response is to shut themselves down for self-protection. "This cannot be cured with quick methods," the doctor continued. "There is no short-term program or miracle technique." Daniel took a deep breath. "So, what should I do?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The doctor looked directly at him. "They need 3 things," he said. "Consistent presence, consistency, and genuine affection every day. Not compensatory playtime, not expensive gifts, not brief, occasional attention. Every day," the doctor emphasized, "for a long time." Daniel nodded, even though he knew it meant he would have to change nearly his entire life. The idea of hiring yet another person made Daniel Whitmore hesitate more than any business decision he had ever faced. After 5 failures, every new face that entered his home felt like a double-edged blade. He was afraid to hope, but he was even more afraid of doing nothing. It was Mrs. Eleanor, the housekeeper, who had been with the family for more than 20 years, who finally broke the silence. One afternoon, when Daniel had just returned from the office with his familiar look of exhaustion, she stood waiting for him in the living room. "Mr. Whitmore," she said slowly, her hands clasped together, "I know you have tried many people already, but I would like to suggest one more. Just one." Daniel looked up, his tired eyes still attentive. "Her name is Clara Hayes," she continued. "She has only recently moved to this city. She has no experience working for wealthy families, no teaching degrees, but she has a very rare heart." Daniel remained silent. Mrs. Eleanor explained that Clara came from a small town. Her parents had died in a traffic accident several years earlier. Since then, Clara had given up her studies to work and raise her younger sister Sophie, who had been only 12 at the time. She had taken on every kind of job: cleaning, caring for the elderly, heavy work that few people wanted. "She has never walked away halfway through," Mrs. Eleanor said firmly. "And most importantly, she knows what loss is." Daniel exhaled softly. He was used to flawless resumes and polished recommendations. Yet those very perfect people had been the ones who left one after another, causing his children to retreat further into themselves. Finally, he nodded. "Give her an interview," Daniel said. "Just a conversation." That day, Clara Hayes appeared at the mansion gate in a simple light blue dress with a white collar, black shoes that were old but clean and carefully polished. She did not carry the air of professional confidence. Her hands clutched the strap of her bag, her back held slightly straighter, as if reminding herself to stand firm. When she stepped into the living room, Clara did not look around to assess the wealth. She simply bowed her head in greeting to Daniel Whitmore and Mrs. Eleanor, then stood still, waiting to be questioned. Daniel studied her closely. There was nothing artificial about her, no calculation in her eyes, only a strange calm, as though she had faced far harder things than this. "Do you have experience caring for young children?" Daniel asked. "Not much, sir," Clara answered honestly. "I have only cared for my younger sister since she was very small." Daniel nodded. "You are aware of my children's situation?" Clara lifted her gaze. Her brown eyes did not shy away. "I have heard about it," she said gently. "I know they have lost someone very important." There was no judgment, no exaggerated pity. Daniel was silent for a moment, then asked the question he had asked everyone before her. "If things become too difficult, what will you do?" Clara did not answer immediately. She thought for a few seconds, then spoke slowly, carefully, as though she were speaking more to herself than to him. "I will not leave Mr. Whitmore." Daniel looked at her. "I have no certificates to hang on the wall," Clara continued. "No special methods, but I know what it feels like to lose family. And I know that the most painful thing is not grief, but when people leave." Her voice trembled slightly, but it did not break. "If you give me a chance, I will stay, no matter how difficult it becomes." In that moment, Daniel felt something shift ever so subtly within him. Not trust, not yet, just a fragile thread of hope. And for the first time in many months, he chose to take a risk not with the logic of a businessman, but with the instinct of a father. "All right," Daniel said quietly. "You can start tomorrow." Clara lowered her head, her hands tightening together. "Thank you," she said. "I will do my very best." Clara Hayes began her work very early one morning. Before the sun had fully risen, she was already in the vast kitchen of the Whitmore mansion. She made no unnecessary noise, no music, no chairs dragged across the floor. Every movement was slow and gentle, as if she were afraid of startling the house itself. Ethan and Lucas did not appear on the first day. The boys remained in their room, the door slightly ajar. Clara did not approach. She simply passed through the hallway a few times, doing her work as if no one were watching. She mopped the floors, folded laundry, opened the windows to let in sunlight. And while she worked, she sang softly. Not familiar lullabies, but old melodies from the countryside where she had grown up. Simple tunes, imperfect yet steady, enough to fill the empty space without intruding upon it. Daniel noticed it that evening. He stood on the staircase, listening to the faint singing drifting up from the kitchen. For reasons he could not explain, it did not irritate him. Instead, something in his chest eased just a little. The second day passed in silence. Clara prepared 3 meals a day. She did not bring the food into the boys' room as the others had done. She simply placed a small tray outside the door on the low table against the wall. On each napkin she drew a small picture with colored pencils, a smiling face, a flower, an awkward little heart. No notes, no urging words. Ethan and Lucas did not eat. The plates remained untouched when Clara collected them. She did not show disappointment, did not sigh. She quietly cleaned up and continued her work. On the third day, something very small changed. When Clara returned to collect the afternoon tray, a piece of carrot cake was gone, just one small piece. But the plate was no longer untouched. Clara paused for the briefest moment. She did not smile, said nothing. She simply carried the tray away, as usual. But that evening, when Daniel returned home, Mrs. Eleanor whispered to him in the kitchen. "One of the boys ate," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Daniel said nothing. He simply stood there for a long time, staring into the empty space before him, as if afraid that reacting too strongly might make that tiny miracle disappear. On the 4th day, the plate was a little emptier. On the 5th day, both plates were clean. That evening, Daniel stood outside the boys' door. He saw the crumpled napkins on the table, the small drawings wrinkled and crushed after the meal. His throat tightened. Clara still did not speak directly to Ethan and Lucas. She did not ask questions, did not call their names, did not ask them to come out. She simply remained there, steadily present and non-intrusive. On the afternoon of the 5th day, as Clara folded clean laundry in the hallway, she sat down on the floor, her back against the wall, at just the right distance from the boy's door. She began to tell a story. Not to anyone in particular, just telling it. "Once, when I was as small as you two," she said in an even voice, not looking toward the door, "my home had a large dirt yard. My sister and I used to play there until it was completely dark before we would finally go inside." The story flowed on. Clara spoke of windy afternoons, of an old swing that creaked, of simple but warm dinners. Her voice carried no sorrow, only gentle remembrance. Behind the slightly open door, 2 pairs of eyes were quietly watching. Ethan and Lucas did not flee as before. They did not shrink away. They simply sat still, listening, their breathing slowing. Daniel stood at the far end of the hallway, witnessing everything. He realized that in the 5 days since Clara had arrived, she had not tried to fix anything. She was simply showing the 2 children one simple thing they had lost long ago, that someone was there, without demands, without force, and without leaving. From that afternoon on, the hallway outside Ethan and Lucas's room became the place where Clara Hayes spent most of her day. She did not bring a chair. She simply spread a thin cloth over the cold wooden floor, sat cross-legged with her back against the wall. In her hands were a few sheets of white paper and a pencil worn down at the tip. Sometimes she folded clean laundry. Sometimes she simply sat still, as if waiting for something she never tried to hurry. She continued telling stories, not moral lessons, not grand fairy tales, just small fragments of a simple childhood. "When I was your age," Clara said in a low, even voice, "I used to sit on the porch in the afternoons. My mother would hang laundry, and I would scribble on the dirt with a wooden stick." She paused briefly, then continued, "I didn't draw well, but my mother always said that every drawing deserved a place on the wall." She smiled very faintly, as though that smile were meant only for herself. The bedroom door remained slightly open, but the gap between the door and the wall had widened a little compared to the days before. Enough for hallway light to slip inside, enough for the boys to see the woman sitting outside without feeling invaded. Daniel sometimes watched from a distance. He noticed that Clara never looked directly at the door while telling her stories. She did not call Ethan or Lucas by name. She did not ask, "Are you listening?" She simply spoke, as though the stories existed independently, not needing an audience to have meaning. And that was precisely what kept the boys there. One lightly rainy afternoon, Clara brought along an old box. She set it on the floor and opened it, revealing neatly arranged wax crayons in every color. She did not turn around. She did not push the box toward the door. She simply took a red crayon, bent down, and began drawing directly on the wooden floor. A house appeared, very simple. A triangular roof, square windows, a small path leading in. Clara continued drawing, slowly and patiently. A garden, a few flowers. Then 2 small human figures standing in front of the house. She set the crayon down. "But I don't know what color the sky should be," she said naturally, as if thinking aloud. "Do you think light blue or dark blue would be nicer?" There was no question aimed at the door, no expectant glance, just a remark drifting through the space. There was the faintest movement behind her. The door opened a little wider. Daniel held his breath. Ethan appeared first. The boy stepped out very slowly, as if every movement required careful consideration. His hands clutched the hem of his shirt, his wide eyes fixed on the colorful drawings on the floor. Clara looked up, just for a second. She smiled very gently, then immediately returned to her drawing as though his presence had changed nothing at all. "What color do you think the sky should be?" she asked calmly. Ethan stood still for a long time. He turned his head to look back into the room, where Lucas was still hiding behind the door. Their eyes met in that brief instant, a silent confirmation. Then Ethan took another step forward. He bent down, his small hand trembling as it touched the box of crayons. He chose a light blue one without saying a word. He began to color the sky. The strokes were uneven. The lines overlapped. But slowly, a sky took shape beneath his small hand. Clara said nothing more. She simply continued adding small details, as if the two of them had been working together for a long time. 5 minutes passed. Lucas came out, smaller, slower, but his eyes were no longer panicked. Lucas took a yellow crayon and drew a round sun in the corner of the picture. No one spoke. There was no urging, no excessive praise. Just 3 people sitting on the hallway floor, creating a simple picture together. Daniel leaned against the wall at the end of the hall, his heart pounding so loudly he feared even his breathing might shatter the moment. 6 months. For 6 long months, this was the first time Ethan and Lucas had willingly stayed close to an adult. Not by force, not out of fear, not out of obligation. Simply because they wanted to. Clara did not mark the moment with any special gesture. When the drawing was finished, she simply folded the paper carefully and set it aside. "We'll continue tomorrow," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ethan and Lucas did not answer, but neither of them went back into the room right away. And Daniel understood that another door, an invisible one, yet far more important, had begun to open. After the afternoon with the colored pencils, nothing changed overnight. There were no miracles, no sudden transformations. But inside the Whitmore mansion, very small things began to shift, slowly and steadily, like morning sunlight slipping through a crack in the door after a long night. Clara Hayes kept her rhythm exactly the same. She did not rush. She did not use the moment when the boys had stepped out to push forward more aggressively. She understood that the most precious thing right now was not speed, but not frightening them. On the first evening after the drawing, Clara prepared the bath for Ethan and Lucas as usual. Warm water, a few foam toys floating on the surface. She did not raise her voice. She did not hurry them. Ethan entered the bathroom first. Lucas followed, still gripping his brother's shirt. There was no crying. Clara sat on the small stool beside the tub, singing softly, a simple, cheerful tune without elaborate lyrics. The boys splashed the water, their eyes occasionally flicking toward her as if to make sure she was still there. That night they went to sleep earlier than usual. Not perfectly. Their breathing still quickened in their dreams. But there were no longer violent panic episodes that kept the whole house awake. Daniel stood in the hallway, watching their bedroom door close, his chest filled with a mix of relief and fear. He was afraid that if he hoped too much, everything might disappear again. In the days that followed, Ethan and Lucas began to eat full meals, not because they were forced, not because they were reminded, but simply because Clara placed the food down and sat there, telling small, casual stories about the garden, about birds that perched on the fence, about the smell of freshly baked bread. When the boys finished eating, she nodded, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They began to call her by name. Not immediately, not loudly. Just one morning, as Clara was tying Lucas's shoelaces, the boy whispered, "Clara," so softly that she might not have heard it if she had not been close. Clara did not stop what she was doing. She simply replied gently, "Yes, I'm here." Lucas said nothing more, but his small hands were no longer trembling as before. At night the nightmares still came, and Clara always heard them. She kept her bedroom door slightly open, just enough for Ethan's or Lucas's soft cries to reach her. Each time she would rise, prepare a cup of warm milk, bring a few cookies, and gently enter the boys' room. She did not turn on the bright lights. She simply sat down in the rocking chair beside the bed and set the milk on the small table. She did not ask what had happened. She did not make them explain. She was simply there, singing very softly until the boys' breathing slowed. Many nights Daniel would wake to get a glass of water and witness that scene. Clara sitting in the dim light, the boys asleep, their faces peaceful. She did nothing at all, just sat there, as if guarding their sleep were the most natural thing in the world. Sometimes Daniel saw her quickly wipe away a tear from her cheek. He never asked, because he understood that some pains do not need words, only to be transformed into quiet care. 3 weeks passed. Ethan and Lucas began to smile more. Not loud laughter, but small, sudden smiles when Clara told a silly story or made funny faces to amuse them. They no longer avoided Daniel when he entered the room. They were still shy, still kept their distance, but their eyes were no longer panicked. Sometimes they looked at him as if cautiously trying to trust again. And Daniel understood that while he was still learning how to be a present father, Clara had already become the emotional anchor the two children leaned on to find their footing again. A sharp crack echoed clearly through the quiet space, pulling Daniel back to reality. Clara turned around, startled. When she saw Daniel standing there, the color drained from her face. She immediately released the seesaw, causing the two children to cry out in protest. She hurried toward him, unconsciously straightening her apron. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I brought the children into the garden without asking for permission first." Ethan and Lucas ran over, wrapping their arms tightly around Daniel's legs. "Daddy, we were playing on the seesaw." "It's really fun, Daddy." Daniel bent down and gathered both boys into his arms. His heart felt as if it might burst from the surge of emotion. He looked up at Clara. In her eyes was genuine fear, fear that she had done something wrong, fear that the beautiful moment that had just ended would be followed by her departure. But Daniel said only one thing, his voice trembling. "Thank you." Clara froze. "Thank you for bringing laughter back to my children." That afternoon passed with a strange feeling for Daniel Whitmore. He played with Ethan and Lucas in the garden for a while longer, keeping his promise to them. He pushed the seesaw, jogged slowly behind them, listening to their laughter ring out like living heartbeats. Yet throughout that time, his eyes kept returning to Clara Hayes. She stood a little apart, not interfering, simply observing. There was no pride on her face, no expectation of recognition, only the calm of someone who had done what she believed was right. When the sun began to dip behind the trees, Daniel told the boys to go inside and wash their hands for dinner. "Clara," he said quietly, "after dinner I'd like to speak with you for a moment." She nodded softly. The hands picking up the toys paused for just a second, then continued as usual. In Daniel's study, warm yellow light washed over the familiar walls. It had always been the place where he felt safest, but tonight he felt as though he were the one who needed courage. Clara stood before his desk, her hands clasped together. Daniel did not beat around the bush. "I've been watching you for 3 weeks," he said slowly. "I've seen you do what the 5 before you could not." Clara lowered her head. "Sir, I only—" "No," Daniel interrupted, his voice softening. "You didn't only do anything. You did what I, as a father, failed to do." The room fell silent. Daniel stood, walked around the desk, and stopped in front of Clara. "I tried to find the best people," he continued. "I thought that degrees, experience, the right methods would save my children. But today, when I saw them laughing on the seesaw, I realized I had been looking in the wrong place." He paused for a moment to steady his voice. "You don't treat my children like a job, you treat them like family." Clara felt her eyes burn. She tried to remain composed. "Mr. Whitmore," she said softly, "I truly care about Ethan and Lucas, but if I've overstepped—" Daniel shook his head immediately. "You haven't crossed any lines. You were exactly where they needed you to be." He took a deep breath, as if preparing for a decision greater than signing a multi-million-dollar contract. "I want to propose something different from our original agreement." Clara held her breath. "I want you to stay here," Daniel said clearly. "Not just work during the day and leave. I want you to live in this mansion." Clara looked up, her eyes wide. "I will raise your salary," he continued, "provide full benefits, and most importantly, I want you to be primarily responsible for caring for and raising Ethan and Lucas, not just as an employee, but as part of the family." Clara stood motionless. She did not think of the money. She thought of Sophie, her younger sister, still living in a small rented room near her university. "Sir, I can't leave my sister alone," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "Sophie is still in school, and I need to be near her." Daniel nodded. He had already considered this. "Your sister can move here with you," he said. "There's a large room on the second floor, or if needed, I'll have another room prepared. Sophie is studying medicine, isn't she? I am willing to support her tuition." Clara could not hold back any more. Tears spilled freely, uncontrollable. She lifted her hand to cover her mouth, her body trembling. "No one has ever done this for us," she said through her sobs. "I don't know how to thank you." Daniel stepped closer. "I'm the one who should be thanking you," he said quietly. "You saved my children, and perhaps you saved me as well." Clara nodded, tears flowing freely. "I accept," she said. "I will stay, and I promise. I will care for Ethan and Lucas with everything I have." Daniel extended his hand, but Clara did not take it. She stepped forward and hugged him. The embrace was brief, awkward, but sincere. Daniel froze for a moment, then gently placed his hand on her back. It was the first hug he had received since the day his wife left, and in that moment he felt it clearly. A new family had just been formed, not by blood, but by the choice to stay. The days following that offer unfolded in an entirely different rhythm. There was no noise, no overwhelming sudden changes. Just small things being gently rearranged, as though the Whitmore mansion were learning to breathe to a new rhythm. Clara Hayes moved into the second-floor bedroom that had stood empty for many years. She brought very few belongings, just a few changes of clothes, some old books, and a small framed photograph of herself and Sophie back in their hometown. Daniel had everything else prepared for her, but Clara kept the room simple, without excess. That weekend, Sophie Hayes came to visit. The young woman stood frozen at the mansion gate, both overwhelmed and anxious. Sophie was studying medicine, had lived in hardship for many years, and had never imagined she would enter a place like this as someone who was welcomed. Clara hugged her sister tightly. "I'm here now," she said softly. "Everything will be all right." Sophie stayed. Arranging accommodation for the two sisters happened quickly, but what surprised Daniel most was not their adaptation to the new space. It was Ethan and Lucas's. The boys were not afraid of Sophie's presence. They were curious. They observed, and very quickly they accepted her as part of the household. One morning, Daniel came downstairs and encountered a scene he had never thought he would see. Clara stood at the stove, flipping small bear-shaped pancakes. Sophie sat at the table, eating breakfast, while reviewing her lessons. Ethan and Lucas sat across from each other, legs swinging under the table, eating and telling silly stories about their dreams from the night before. And he had a place at the table. 4 people sat around a large wooden table, sunlight pouring through the windows, no one in a hurry to leave. For the first time in a very long while, Daniel ate breakfast at home. His life began to change through very small things. He no longer rushed out of the house early in the morning. He started rearranging his work schedule, declining unnecessary meetings. Some afternoons he came home just to eat with the boys, then returned to work. Ethan and Lucas were still cautious with him. But that caution no longer carried fear. It was the gentle testing of children learning to trust again. They followed Clara everywhere, helping her tidy toys, sitting beside her as she folded laundry, telling her small, scattered stories they told no one else. Clara listened to everything, without interrupting, without urging. To her, those stories were as important as anything in the world. In the evenings, after Ethan and Lucas had fallen asleep, Daniel and Clara would sometimes sit together in the living room, not to discuss work, not to talk about plans, just ordinary human stories. Daniel spoke of the early years of building his career, of how accustomed he had become to controlling everything. Clara spoke of her rural childhood, of years spent working nonstop to support Sophie's education. There was no longer a clear boundary between employer and employee. There were simply two adults sharing a common responsibility, raising two children who had endured far too much.